In this first lecture, we're going to begin by defining ethics and bioethics. We're going to talk about ethics as a discipline and some of the differences between ethics and other disciplines you are familiar with. We're going to talk about my role in this course and your role in this course as you develop your own ethical framework. We'll do a brief history of the development of bioethics from the time of the medieval church through the Enlightenment period, and really how the focus of what is right and what is wrong and how we determine that changed in society over this time. We'll briefly talk about your personal worldview and prepare you for the first reflection assignment and what you need to do and consider as you begin to develop your own personal ethical framework and foundation. One of the standards that I like to include in all of my lectures is a slide on objectives. Generally, I tell students to use the objectives to guide their studying and preparation for quizzes and exams. We do not have quizzes or exams in this course. However, you still have other assignments that you're going to meet these objectives through. Therefore, I view the objectives as twofold. Use these objectives to help you have an outline of where the lecture is going, as well as use them as checkpoints for your knowledge and understanding as we go through this course. So what is ethics? Simply stated, ethics is the philosophical study of morality, or moral philosophy. Breaking this term down, morality looks at the standards of character and conduct. And philosophy is the critical examination of morality against reason and scientific truth. Therefore, at the most basic level, ethics is the study of what makes something right or wrong. There are two main subcategories that we can break ethics down into: normative ethics and metaethics. Normative ethics looks for authoritative rules or directions that can be applicable for all people in all situations and can tell us what are right actions and what is good character. And the main components of normative ethics is that it should be applicable to everybody in every situation at every time, and answer two ought questions. What ought I do and what ought I be? What ought I do is looking at what are these right actions for human beings, as well as what are the wrong actions for human beings. What ought I be is looking at your character. What makes a good character? What is good character? And what are these goals that we should be aiming for to achieve in our own character to be the best person we can be? While normative ethics is looking for rules and directions, metaethics is looking at judging values and obligations. It's investigating the origin of where do these ethical concepts come from? Where do these ideas of what ought I do and what ought I be, what are they grounded in? What does it actually mean to be morally good? And that leads us to some other questions, such as, is their objective right and wrong, independent of our individual human opinions? Are there discoverable absolute standards that we can use to determine right and wrong in every situation? In other words, metaethics is looking at, does normative ethics actually exist? Is it possible or is it an ideal? And What do right and wrong depend on? Are they context-based? Are they consequence-based? And is this always the case? I want to pause for a minute and focus on this idea of right and wrong, and really focusing on the concept of right. Oftentimes, people use the word right and correct interchangeably. But when it comes to the discipline of ethics, there is an essential difference between right and correct. When something is correct, it is factually true. It is something that is able to be supported beyond a reasonable doubt, something that is confirmed. For example, if we are working in a base 10 system, then 2 plus 2 equals 4. That is correct. Right has to do with moral truth. Right has to do with this concept of what ought we do. So when we're talking about the discipline of ethics, we're not just talking about what is correct. We're not talking about what does a textbook tell me. What we are looking for is much more personal. And how do we take the information, the correct information that is available to us, and then apply that to know what we ought to do and what is the best decision from what we ought to do? So as a discipline, ethics really has two tasks, and we're going to address both of those tasks in this course. The first task of ethics is to examine ethical systems, to examine different foundations of what ought to happen, what should be defined as right, what is the moral truth. And those are ethical theories. And we will take some time to look at different ethical theories relevant to healthcare and bioethics. The other task of ethics is to actually examine real-world ethical problems and apply those theories in specific scenarios and situations. What ought I do when this situation comes up? What theories and systems ought I apply? And that is when we get into the concept of applied ethics. Now that we have briefly discussed what ethics is, we are going to go from the broad heading of ethics more specifically into bioethics. For me personally, I like to break down the meaning of words by breaking the words into prefixes, suffixes, root words to better understand. So bioethics could be broken down into bio and ethics. Bio comes from bios, meaning life. Think of the study of biology. And ethos is character or custom, and is often translated to what we know today as ethics. So when we put that concept of life and character, custom, ethics together, we get bioethics, which in its simplest form can be defined as applying the concepts of ethics, characters, customs, to how we respond to the sciences, or specifically life sciences. Bioethics usually focuses on content related to biology and medicine. So a lot of times you will see bioethics textbooks broken down to issues at the beginning of life, issues at the end of life, issues related to human interactions. The theories and principles that we're going to use to guide our work in bioethics come from the larger field of ethics. So the same ethical theorists' principles are going to be applied in bioethics. And we're going to be, in the first half of this course, really digging deep into some of the most common theories and principles. Bioethics application in the workplace is going to help us analyze moral standards and judgments that should drive healthcare matters. This is a healthcare bioethics course, so our focus is going to be on healthcare. And whether you're looking at healthcare from the standpoint of the person providing care at the bedside, the administrator running the hospital, the financial officer making very important decisions that are going to affect the bedside care, we really want to make sure that we're making judgments based on a moral ground. And to really understand a moral ground, we have to understand ethics. Throughout this course, we are therefore going to have to answer some very important questions for ourselves. And some of these questions may be things you've just taken for granted or things that you've never really stopped and had to define. So we're going to look at what actually is a human being. What is a person? We may understand what a person is, but how would you define, put this into words, what makes someone a person? And while this may seem very, very simple to you, you're going to find out that as you start to put limitations on a description, you want to make sure you're still being inclusive of all human beings. Does this definition of a person actually eliminate some people? This will make more sense as we go forward. You're going to have to answer the age-old question of when does life begin? And even for Christians, this can differ your view of when does life begin. Therefore, based off of when does life begin, other questions arise as related to ethics and what do we do with zygotes, gametes, if and based on when we define life beginning. Another question, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning and purpose of suffering? How should we view and understand suffering? And then what is death? When does death come? How do we define someone as dead? And you may think that this is very obvious. And in some cases, death can be obvious. I can tell you as an emergency department nurse, there are certain signs that we say are obvious of death, that anyone can say the person is dead. Not to sound gruesome, but to be very straightforward. If a person is completely decapitated, then we are able to say, and EMS is able to declare in the field, the patient is dead, because if your head is not connected to the rest of your body, you are dead. However, there are other areas where brain function, heartbeat, breathing on your own, those cause some more gray areas that we'll get to explore. For me, I love exploring these. I love stretching my brain. Some of you may really enjoy this too. Some of you may find this very stressful to go through, but we're going to work through it together, and I think you're going to come out on the other side with a really strong understanding of what you believe, why you believe it. I'm not here to tell you what is right and wrong. I'm not here to answer these questions for you. You have to be able to answer them for yourself and be consistent. On the last slide, I told you that I'm not going to give you the answers to these ethical questions. And I think for a lot of people in their first ethics course, that is the big hitting of the wall. This course is not going to give you the answers. Instead, you have to establish answers to these questions for yourself. And that's what you'll be doing in your first reflective assignment. There are ethical questions that we are not all in this class going to agree upon. And that's why there are ethical theories, which we will discuss later. Your faith, your worldview, which includes your culture, your upbringing, and your experiences, are all going to impact your understanding of right and wrong and your conceptualization of what ought I do and what ought I be. And these varying views lead us to moral conflict. And moral conflict occurs when people are acting within their own different belief systems about how the world operates. And when we have different views on how the world operates, different views on social reality, we find ourselves at odds with each other. What is social reality? Social reality is this concept of understanding what is an ideal society. What are we aiming for? And we can all agree that we want to be able to determine and articulate what is right and wrong. But how do we get to right and wrong? And generally speaking, how we get to right and wrong depends on our view of reality. And at the most basic level for an introductory ethics course, reality can fall into two large concepts: understanding reality through orthodoxy or understanding reality through progressivism. According to orthodoxy, reality is independent of, prior to, and more powerful than the human experience. In other words, we as humans do not define reality. Reality is independent of us. Reality came before us. And reality is more powerful than we are. For a lot of Christians who hold to orthodoxy, this leads to the belief in an external, definable, transcendent authority known as God. And God is that from which we come to know what is good and true. And for many Christians, that is through the Bible. God revealed truth to mankind through the Bible. The Bible tells us how to live, why we are here, what is our purpose on earth, and where are we ultimately going. However, it's not just that simple. We are a fallen people living in a fallen world. And though the Bible is the Word of God breathed through man, it is also open to interpretation. Think about all the many different translations of the Bible that exist and the different interpretations that people have of the meaning of the content of the Bible. Some people and some beliefs take the Bible literally as written, and some say the Bible is a metaphor. So even within orthodoxy, the view of reality is not consistent from person to person, which leads to moral conflict. Again, we also have progressivism, which is different than orthodoxy. Those who hold to progressivism believe that reality, truth, and authority are ever unfolding. In other words, you never truly have a complete, solid understanding of what is reality, what is truth, and what is authority. Because we are always learning, we're always growing, we're always adding to our experiences. So your worldview is always being expanded. And we're able to apply all of this growth and learning. And as we apply this, our understanding of reality grows. However, there is no end point. So for those of you who like mathematics, it's kind of like this limit that we're getting closer and closer and closer to, but we never really reach that end. You never have a full picture of reality. Therefore, under progressivism, it's not God or a higher power that determines reality and what is right and wrong, good and bad as the ultimate truth, but rather it is humans. And at first thought, you may think, well, that takes God out of the picture. Not necessarily. There are many progressive Christians who believe that it is our responsibility as humans put on this earth by God to serve God to determine right and wrong and ultimate truth through our free will and how we interpret and understand the Bible. Those who hold to progressivism also believe that people set the ground rules for conduct, and we are therefore responsible for setting personal and societal rules based on today's age. And we make those rules grounded on the best information possible that we know in this time period. You may have heard cases where people say that the Bible had rules for the time, and those rules were appropriate at that time, so they're not always appropriate today. That would be a more progressive view of interpretation of the Bible. So, even within Christianity, where you may think, oh, we have very similar morals and understandings, when you get down to the very basics, this understanding of reality, there's conflict, there's discrepancy. And in this course, I'm not asking you to challenge your beliefs per se, but what I really want you to come away from this course with is a solid understanding of what you believe, why you believe it, and how your faith and worldview impact your belief system. Because if you are going to stand for something, you need to be able to defend why you stand for it. Moral conflict is unavoidable. All of us are going to have to make ethical decisions. We are going to have to face the issues that confront us. And not only do we need to face ethical issues, but to face them in the best way possible, we need to have a theoretical foundation on which we can build and evaluate these situations and how to respond to them. And throughout history, many individuals have attempted to build foundations that would be relevant for all people in all situations. And these foundations have become known as ethical theories. An ethical theory is a specific philosophical approach to determining what is right or wrong. Ethical theories provide a set of rules or principles to evaluate moral situations. But how do we know if an ethical theory is a good theory or not? We already recognize that moral conflict exists because people cannot agree on the definition of right and wrong. And this is where ethical frameworks come in. Every individual must know the questions of their foundational beliefs and assumptions of how the world fits together. These beliefs and assumptions can be summed up into three categories: ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God in ethics. Each ethical theory is founded in how it responds to these three questions. So we're going to look at the three questions of ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God in ethics. Not only do you need to be able to answer these questions for yourself, but in the weeks that follow, we will analyze specific ethical theories against how they respond to these three big questions. When preparing to analyze ethical dilemmas and building our own ethical framework, the first question that an ethicist must answer is the question of ultimate reality. It is interesting that while humans inhabit the same world, we have very different models for understanding the world. What is the universe? Is the universe a random result of a primordial cosmic sneeze? Is the universe the purposeful work of a master designer and creator, such as God or another authoritative power? Or is the universe something else altogether? And where do right and wrong come from? This is different than the question of how do we know what is right and wrong. But Foundationally, where is the origin of right and wrong? And that is what ultimate reality is looking at, the ultimate source of right and wrong. For many of us, as Christians, we would say that the universe was formed by a divine creator, and therefore God created right and wrong. However, this doesn't get us out of the challenge of the question of ultimate reality. This leads us now to the challenge of, how does God communicate what is right and wrong to people? And how do we understand other aspects of the universe through God? Is this divine revelation only through Scripture? Is it general revelation through that we can see through nature? And if we believe in God as the creator of the universe, then to what degree do we make God a part of ethics? Is God essential to every part of ethics? And many of you may be nodding along and saying yes. I want you to keep an open mind about this. Over the next couple of weeks, we will discuss ethical theories that were developed by devout Christians who opted to keep God out of their ethical theory. How does that work? And what if we reject God as the source of ultimate reality? What if we opt to believe that the universe was the result of a primordial sneeze? Clearly then, the origin of right and wrong is not God. But then where do right and wrong come from? Do right and wrong come from human thought? But then how do we determine right and wrong? Is right and wrong based on the laws of nature, and therefore nothing more than a survival strategy imposed on us by our genetic structure? Are right and wrong just labels that we attach to encourage or discourage certain actions? Ultimately, when responding to ultimate reality, we must all ask ourselves, where is the origin of right and wrong? The second big question we must answer for ourselves and evaluate in ethical theories is the question of human nature. Human beings have a lot in common with members of the animal world. We both need food to stay alive. We both breathe, we drink, we excrete waste, and we reproduce often in very similar fashion. Some animal parts are even interchangeable with human parts, such as valves from pigs and cows to replace defective valves in humans. And baboon hearts have been used to replace human hearts as well. For all these similarities, however, there is something different about human beings, and our nature compels us to speak of ourselves differently than how we speak of animals. If my dog were to get out of my yard and have a bowel movement on my neighbor's property, I would probably say something like, "Bad dog," or "You shouldn't do that." But I'm not viewing my dog as a moral agent. I'm not holding my dog morally responsible for going to the bathroom in the neighbor's yard. If anything, I'm probably holding myself responsible to some degree that I let the dog out of the house or didn't have the dog well enough trained that he had a bowel movement in my house. However, if my neighbor were to come over and have a bowel movement in my yard, I would hold my neighbor to a higher moral standard of, quote, being a bad neighbor. And there's this universal tendency as humans that we hold other humans to higher moral status than we hold the animals. So what is different about our nature as humans? Is it our freedom to make decisions? Is it our ability to think rationally? Is it our spiritual sensitivity and awareness? Is it that we were created in the image and likeness of God or a higher being? Is it explained simply by neurophysiology and that we're just quantitatively more complex than the animals? And human nature, we want to say what makes a person a good person. But before we can say that, we have to understand the difference between a good person and, say, a good dog. Which brings us also to the next question. Why do we as humans sometimes act in ways that others would consider immoral? Why do we as humans sometimes do things that we should not do? Ethicists disagree on many, many things, but pretty much all ethicists agree on one thing. Humans have a problem. We are not where we need to be in the moral sense. And we can say that ethicists agree on that because if we were doing everything right all the time, there would be no need for ethics. There would be no question of what is right and what is wrong and what ought I do and what ought I be. So, while ethicists do agree that we have a problem, different ethicists, and therefore different theories, are going to say that there are different causes of the problem. And the definition of what is the cause of the problem with human nature and why we are not where we need to be morally is what actually separates one ethical theory from the other. So, as you consider your answers to these three big questions, you need to ask yourself, what is it that causes our problem? The final question that you need to ask yourself when building your ethical framework, and the final question that you need to look at when you are evaluating the foundation of ethical theories, is what is the role of God in ethics? Is God essential to ethics? Is God necessary in determining right and wrong, ultimate reality, and explaining what is wrong with humans and what human nature is? Is there no room for God? Do we need to approach ethics in such a manner that we do not address God? And some Christians have suggested this based on the foundation of we want ethical theories to be normative. We want ethics to be relevant to all people in all situations at all times. And since there are those who are atheists and agnostics, or those who do not believe in a single God, do we need to then keep God out of ethics in a manner to universalize it? Or is it better to try to universalize ethics by saying that God is optional and allow room for God, but not make God foundational to ethics? Or is that becoming too wishy-washy? And if we believe in God, then we need to make God at the center. And if you've noticed, I've gone in a complete circle now from God necessary to no room in God to God optional back to God necessary. And this is often the challenge that many ethicists face as they try to determine where God fits into ethics. And this is a decision that you must make for yourself, and then a decision that you will consider when you evaluate each ethical theory against your foundational framework in your search and quest for the truth of ethics. Now that we have defined ethics and bioethics, and we've briefly talked about the foundation of ethical theories and the three big questions of ethics, we're going to apply those three big questions and look at a brief history lesson of how the discipline and practice and understanding of ethics has grown, evolved, and developed from the time of medieval religion through the period of Enlightenment science. So when we talk about ethics, there are three main facets that we look at regarding an ethical theory. We look at ultimate reality, the source of truth. We look at the nature of human beings, and we look at how that theory defines or describes the role of God. So in our brief history lesson, we're going to look at the change in ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God in the time from the medieval church through the Enlightenment. So we're going to go back to the year 391 AD, where the Roman Catholic Church became the most powerful organization in the world following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. At this time, ultimate reality was widely accepted as being the Bible. The Bible was descriptively and prescriptively the source of truth. Descriptively, the Bible accounted for human nature, human origin, and destiny. Where did we come from? Why do we act the way we act? Where are we going? The Bible explained the presence of evil and the cause of evil. And the Bible led us to an understanding of what and who we were. In other words, normative ethics, the overarching applies to all people at all times, answers to what ought I do, what ought I be, came from the Bible. Prescriptively, the Bible told people how to live their life, including how to structure specific social institutions such as marriage, the family, and the government. And while the Bible was treated as the ultimate source of knowledge about mankind, and while many of us still treat the Bible as the ultimate source of knowledge, the limitation of the Bible was noted. And we talked about this in the first PowerPoint, that we are a fallen people who are imperfect, and therefore we can misunderstand, misinterpret the scriptures, or be led astray based on how we want the scriptures, what we want it to say versus what it did say. So recognizing, understanding this component of human nature, our inability to clearly interpret and articulate the source of truth was very important in understanding ethics. The other important component of human nature was understanding this idea that humans are made in the image of God, which also addresses what is the role of God. Therefore, we as humans, because of being made in this image of God, we know and understand that a single God exists, and we, through free will given to us by God, can choose to act in a manner that is to love God. And this was the understanding of ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God during the period of the medieval religion. When we discuss ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God, an important consideration is this problem of evil. And the Bible also explains to us the source of the problem of evil. When we think of evil, we usually split it into two categories: natural evils and moral evils. Natural evils are those evils that are the result of the malfunctioning of our physical world. Things such as storms, earthquakes, illness, disease, pain, suffering, and death. Things that usually are not controlled by the deliberate choices of humans. Moral evil, in contrast, is specifically destructive behavior by humans enacted towards or against others. Things such as lying, cheating, killing. And when we look at evil in human nature, The Augustinian theodicity explains how the medieval church viewed the problem of evil. Why do bad things happen? Why is there evil? And this may be a question that you yourself have asked or been asked about. And the answer that was provided by the medieval church was bad things happen because bad things were done. In other words, when we go back to the creation story, because of Adam's original sin and because of the fall of man, human nature was essentially corrupted. And each of us as humans are therefore sinful by nature, morally evil, and blameworthy. Technically, medieval religion dominated Europe until about the 16th century. However, centuries prior to this, slowly a shift in thinking and attitudes began that would ultimately transform how people viewed themselves, their world, and even God. And this shift is what we call the Enlightenment. There are many factors that caused this shift from focusing on the medieval church as the source of truth to science as the source of truth. And among the factors here were historical events such as the Crusades, which introduced new ways of thinking and living, the rise of cities, which increased freedom and mobility and entrepreneurship, as well as the development of universities, which debated ideas that threatened mysticism and revelation, and then the development of the printing press in the 1400s that put the Bible into the hand of the ordinary person. And as we moved into this Enlightenment period, there became a new breed of natural scientists who were attempting to construct an accurate representation of the world based on reason, logic, and evidence, as opposed to the Bible, religious authority, or wisdom. So therefore, we're looking at this shift in ultimate reality from the Bible to science and reason. And as this shift started, for a long time, the discoveries from this new science continued to prove the greatness and glory of God. And an example of this is Sir Isaac Newton, who believed that his findings in science came from this Christian doctrine of a divinely created and ordered world. However, at the same time, this idea of an orderly, logical, machine-like world governed by universal laws of motion began to also suggest something else: an absent God, a deity who would be considered akin to a grand engineer who was detached from the workings of the universe and the lives of the people. And this movement from a God that was intricately involved to this idea of grounding understanding of the world in science and a machine is what became the Enlightenment. And there's two big scientific upheavals during the Enlightenment period that are very important for understanding this shift in understanding of the world. The first is the scientific method. The other, which is closely linked to the scientific method, is this way of envisioning the world as a machine. So, in severing itself from religious faith, the scientific method enthroned the autonomy of the mind as the chief way of acquiring knowledge about the world, and therefore led to this association between medicine and science. If we reflect on the Greek physician Hippocrates, he did disconnect medicine from magic and superstition training doctors to be rational and looking for rational explanations to illness and disease. The Enlightenment medicine doctors proposed to recapture this separation of medicine from religion in several important ways. They began by discrediting supernatural explanations, testing religious beliefs, and challenging the traditions. The goal was to gain an understanding not of why things worked, but of how things work. And this change, this scientific revolution, didn't end with the scientific method. René Descartes pushed this further, committed to proving that the world was mechanical. And he proposed this mechanism view that everything in the world can be explained in terms of the laws that govern matter and govern motion. Therefore, Descartes demystified nature, leaving it no longer the object of contemplation and mystery and the moral purpose it had for the ancients. Instead, he transferred the focus from tradition, revelation, the Bible, and God to reason and logic. And even to today, we see this balance between the ultimate source of truth being God, being reason and logic, and what is the balance between the two. From the ground of medieval religion came the concept of ethical theories that had the foundation of following the ways of God, grounded in mysticism, revelation, and tradition. Out of that grew the Enlightenment science, with an emphasis on the power of reason and this natural order of the universe that could logically explain the world while removing God from the picture, which then brought forth a new set of moral philosophies that remained grounded in rationality as the guide for human contact, but yet were not opposed to religious teaching, but not grounded in religious teaching. These became ethical theories that we would say the role of God was God optional. As we progress in the next few PowerPoints, we are going to look at the primary ethical theories that are discussed today. And as we review these theories, we will look at how they address ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God. As we finish up this week, you are going to be tasked with beginning to build your own ethical framework, and you will be challenged to answer some of the foundational questions of bioethics, not just the questions of ultimate reality, human nature, and the role of God in ethics. You will have to answer those questions, but you will also grapple with some of the other questions that I presented to you at the beginning of this PowerPoint. And all of this is to help you in developing a foundation to prepare you to respond to ethical dilemmas. Just a few things for you to keep in mind as you begin to develop your own ethical framework. The first one is the concept of differences. If you haven't picked up on it yet, humans have very different opinions in what is right and wrong, what is ethical and what is not ethical, what we ought to do and what we ought to be. These differences grow from the differences in theories of what is right and wrong. But these differences are significant because how we view what is right and wrong for ourselves are how we are going to interpret what is right and wrong for others. We all have a theoretical foundation. We all have some foundational beliefs and values on which we build and evaluate ethical decisions. And those foundations are what is considered our worldview. You may be very consciously aware of your worldview. It may be something that you need to investigate and further discover in this course. The bottom line is that you are an ethicist and you cannot avoid ethical dilemmas and ethical issues. You are going to be faced with them. You are going to have to make decisions. And therefore, if you're going to have to make decisions of an ethical matter, then you need to become good at it, because your decisions are affecting yourself as well as others. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to make a decision that you can confidently stand behind moving forward. And that is a lot of what we're going to develop in this class. Your ability to think through a dilemma and reach a conclusion that you can morally and ethically feel good about, and know that you made a conclusion and responded in a way that was consistent with your worldview and your ethical framework. And this brings us to the concept of worldview. I've discussed worldview quite a few times throughout this lecture, but I've yet to define what your worldview is. Your worldview consists of your beliefs and assumptions about how the world fits together. And we all have a worldview. Even if you say, I don't have any beliefs or assumptions, that in essence is your set of beliefs and assumptions. Your worldview consists of the background through which you approach ethics. And therefore, you need to really understand the components of your worldview. In a broad sense, your worldview consists of your faith, which addresses the role of God in ethics, and may also address for you human nature and ultimate reality. Your worldview is also comprised of your culture, where you were raised, how you were brought up, beliefs and customs that you were taught. Your upbringing, again, related very specifically to the household you were raised in and what you were taught as a child and growing up, as well as your life experiences, both personal and professional. And all of these are going to guide your ethical approach and your understanding of right and wrong and what ought to be and what you ought to do. And it's important to note, as we prepare to head into ethical dilemmas in the upcoming weeks and investigating ethical theories, that just because you do not adhere to the foundational beliefs of a theory does not necessarily disprove that theory for all people. And it may not mean that you need to completely disregard that theory. We need to look at what parts, if any, of an ethical theory align with your worldview. And we'll get into that a little bit more in the upcoming weeks. So, just in case your brains aren't spaghetti already based on everything that I've said, and you're not already feeling like I've left you with a bunch of questions and no answers, we're going to go back to the very beginning, and we're going to go back to Plato. And Plato is a Greek philosopher, and he left us with this question that really is at the root of ethics and how we're going to approach ethics. And I want you to stop and pause and just think on this question. So the question Plato postulated was, is it the case that something is good because God approves it? Or is it the case that God approves what is good? And you may feel like this is the same statement reworded. However, the order of the words, as I'm sure you have learned throughout high school and college level English classes, has a lot of impact on the meaning. So, if the former is true, if it is the case that something is good because God approves it, then ethics is an aspect of religion and theology. However, if it is the case that God approves what is good, then ethics is a moral philosophy independent of religion and theology. So, in other words, the role that God plays in truth and in what is good, how you interpret that is going to affect whether you view ethics as being a component of religion and theology, or if you view ethics as being a component of philosophy where it is completely independent of religion and theology. And I'll let you think on that for a little bit.